To be clear, this film is direct sequel to Scream 4 2011, also known as Scream 5. It takes place 25 years after the original Woodsboro murders, when yet another Ghostface appears, and begins targeting a group of teenagers who are each somehow linked to the original killings. The film opens with a view of a house in the town of Woodsboro. A teenage girl, Tara, is alone at home and suddenly receives a call on her landline. Upon noticing that the caller is an unknown number, Tara chooses to ignore the call and resumes texting with her friend, Amber. However, the phone rings persist, prompting Tara to answer. On the other side of the line is a man who introduced himself as Charlie. Charlie claims to be an acquaintance of Tara's mother and claims to know a lot about Tara thanks to her mother. The man then starts asking her about her favorite horror films. Tara says she prefers newer elevated horror films like The Babadook, Hereditary, and The Witch, but the voice asks her about the Stab movies, particularly the original film. Tara tells him she does not remember much about the film because it is old. Therefore, he says that the Stab film begins with a girl alone at home answering an unknown phone call, and engaging in conversation with the killers, who makes her play a game. The voice on the phone then says something that scares Tara.
Would you like to play a game?
Scared, Tara decides to hang up and activate her home security system immediately.
Systems armed.
She starts to look around her surroundings and tells Amber about what just happened. A few moments later, the landline rings again, followed by a text from Amber asking her to pick up the ringing phone. Tara is confused as to how Amber could possibly be aware of her ringing landline, and upon asking, she gets an answer saying that it is not Amber texting her. The anonymous hacker proceeds to ask Tara to pick up the phone, threatening that he would kill Amber if Tara fails to comply. Tara then receives a video recording of Amber, blissfully unaware of being watched, and Tara receives another threat that says that if she dares call the police, Amber will be murdered. Charlie proposes that they should play a game, where Tara has to answer 3 questions about the original Stab film. If Tara answers incorrectly, Amber would get killed. At this panic moment, Tara manages to answer almost all the questions correctly, only slipping in the last question, wherein she answers that Billy Loomis is the killer in Stab 1. But the right answer is there are 2 killers in the original Stab movie, Billy Loomis and Stu Maker. Now realizing that her best friend is about to get murdered, Tara rushes to the door, about to head out to Amber's house. However,
systems armed. All systems disarmed. Systems armed. All systems disarmed.
After that, the landline rings again and Tara pleads the mysterious caller to stop the game. Then all of a sudden, Ghostface appears behind her and attacks her with a knife. The sound of police sirens can be heard in the background as Tara fights for her life. The next scene shows us a view of California, to a woman named Sam who is Tara's sister. We learn that she has left home and her family including Tara for the last 5 years. She receives a text from Tara's friend, Wes, who informs her that Tara was attacked by an unknown assailant. Luckily, Tara's life was saved and she is now hospitalized. Accompanied by her boyfriend Richie, Tara sets off to Woodsboro, her hometown to visit her sister. Meanwhile, Tara's friends are now anxious after the incident that befell Tara. We learn that their names are Chad, Mindy, Liv, Amber, and Wes. They begin to share stories about the infamous killings that happened in the town 25 years ago, perpetrated by a killer called Ghostface and ended the lives of many. Wes then receives news that Tara is now awake, prompting the group to head to the hospital. On the other side of the story, Sam and Richie, who are on their way to Woodsboro, begin conversing about the Stab movies, which are based on the murders that happened in Woodsboro. But Richie tells her he has not seen any of the movies. Upon their arrival at the hospital in Woodsboro, Richie and Sam come across Tara's group of friends, along with a shaken Tara who is still in recovery. Sam tells her boyfriend that she used to babysit Tara and her friends when they were little. Sam then offers to keep Tara company at the hospital. At night, Tara's friends are gathered in a bar. Amber begins voicing her dislike for Sam, who used to stir up trouble with her family, and ended up running away from home, leaving Tara and their mother behind. Amber feels that Sam is dangerous and someone should protect Tara from her. Not long after, a man comes up to them and tries to seduce Liv. Liv claims that the man is a creep who often stalks her on social media. As a result, Chad steps up and asks the man to leave the premises.
I'll see you soon, sweetheart.
Later, we see the man taking a piss behind of the bar, right when he is harassed by an unrevealed figure who shines a car's headlights right at him, irritating the man.
Is that you, pretty boy?
He walks up to the car to check it out, but sees no one in it. But suddenly, a figure dressed as Ghostface sneaks up behind him and stabs him in the jugular, killing him instantly. Meanwhile at the hospital, Sam tells Richie that she'd like to find something to eat. She stops by the restroom to take her antipsychotic meds, right when a figure of a young man in a bloody shirt appears behind her in the reflection in the mirror. The man is a figure of her father, who asks her when she is going to come clean to her sister. Sam then receives a phone call from Amber, but when she answers it, she hears Charlie's voice instead. She immediately recognizes the caller as her sister's attacker, and challenges them to come see her. Right when it is revealed that Ghostface is actually standing behind her. Ghostface moves to attack her and Sam fights for her life. Sam manages to escape unscathed, and bolts out of the room to the hospital halls to look for help. She finds a sheriff and tells him of the attack. However, when the sheriff checks out the room, he finds no one there. Sheriff Judy, the chief police of Woodsboro, arrives at the scene and proceeds to question Sam, Richie, and Amber, who also just arrived. Richie claims that when the incident was taking place, he was by Tara's side, watching Netflix, and accuses Amber of being the culprit. Amber, offended, accuses him back, saying that his alibi is too weak. Sheriff Judy refuses to entertain any of these accusations, and reveals that when the incident took place, Amber and her friends were getting interrogated about the killing of a man behind of the bar that very night. After everyone walks out of the room, Sam decides to come clean to Tara about the event that broke their family apart. As it turns out, it all started when Sam found her mother's old high school diary and decided to read it. From the old diary, she found out that their mother, who was pregnant in high school, was in love with and carrying another man's baby, unbeknownst to her boyfriend at the time, whom she married. That was the moment Sam found out that her dad was not her biological father, and she was livid. Sam then came at her mother and began yelling at her about what she just learned. Before she realized it, her dad was in the room with them and he had heard everything. The disappointed father took off and left them that day, and never came back since. The old diary also revealed that Sam's real father was Billy Loomis, Woodsboro's infamous killer who died 25 years ago. Ever since, Sam pushed everyone away and became a recluse. This information may be the explanation behind Tara's attacker's motivation, which is to lure Sam to return to the town. Sam learns that Richie had been listening to the conversation from outside the door, and he promises to stay and love Sam no matter what. Sam and Richie then go to visit Dewey, Woodsboro's former sheriff who played a part in stopping the murders 25 years ago. He is one of Billy Loomis' surviving victims. Dewey is initially reluctant to welcome the two, and only opens his door after Sam reveals that she is Billy Loomis' daughter. At this moment, Dewey explains that there are certain rules to surviving a stab movie. Rule number 1, never trust the love interest. Rule number 2, the killer's motive is always connected to something in the past. And the most important, rule number 3, the first victim always has a friend group that the killer is a part of. When Sam claims that Tara has a friend group, Dewey tells her to look for the killer there, or at least she needs to figure out who's next. Sam then asks Dewey to come with them and help them, which he refuses, claiming that he does not want to relive the horrors he experienced.
Your time's up.
After the couple leave, Dewey calls his best friend, Sidney, and texts his ex-wife, Gale, both of which are also survivors of the killings 25 years ago. He informs them that the killings have started again, and after a conversation with Sidney, Dewey changes his mind about helping Sam and her friends. He then joins Richie and Sam to visit Tara's friends who are gathered at Chad's house. Together, they try to theorize who the killer is, and what their motive is. Sam also reveals to everyone here that she is Billy Loomis' daughter. Mindy, the horror nerd of the group, comes up with the theory that the killer is trying to create a requel of the Stab franchise, which is when a new movie summons the original characters to pass the torch to new ones. A question is then raised about the identity of the man who died in front of the bar. Amber is informed that the man was the nephew of Stu Maker, the second killer. The group comes to the conclusion that all 3 victims have been people who have connections to Billy Loomis. Later that day, after everyone has gone away from the house, Sheriff Judy, who is Wes' mom, tells her son that she is about to head out to pick up some food order. However, on the way, she suddenly receives a call from an unknown number, which turns out to be Charlie or the Ghostface. Charlie tells her that he is a fan of scary movies, and tells her he is about to kill Judy's son, Wes. The statement scares her and prompts her to head back to her house. She tries calling Wes, but Wes does not pick up because he is currently in the shower. Judy bolts out of the car to save her son. But Ghostface jumps her on the porch, and stabs her to death. Wes, who has now finished showering, roams the house casually, absolutely unaware of what just went down right outside his door. Wes tries to reach for a taser by the door when he comes face to face with the killer on the foyer, but he is unable to do so. The killer stabs Wes on the jugular, slowly impaling him with the knife until he dies. Later, Sam arrives at Wes' house right as the officers are bagging up Wes and his mother's dead bodies. There she meets Gale, a reporter and the writer of Stab, which story was inspired by the true events that befell her, Dewey, and Sidney 25 years ago. Not long after, Sam is surprised to find that the police officer, who is supposed to watch over her sister, is present at the crime scene. Worried for her sister's safety, Sam steps back into her car and is about to head to the hospital. Dewey, who understands her fear, comes with to anticipate the unthinkable. At the hospital, Tara is lying alone in her hospital cot when she hears faint commotion outside her room. She suspects that something isn't right, so she pulls out her 4-cord and staggers out of the bed into the wheelchair next to it. All of a sudden, the power suddenly goes out in the entire hospital. Wincing in pain from the unhealed stitches in her hand, Tara rolls her wheelchair outside and finds the premises eerily quiet. As she arrives by the receptionist's desk, she gasps in shock to find a police officer lying dead, covered in blood. Tara wheels herself some more, and hides in a room nearby. Not long after, someone opens the door, shocking her, and it turns out that it is Richie. But Ghostface suddenly sneaks up behind Richie and attacks him, stabbing him in the arm and knocking him unconscious. Tara manages to slip out of the room and struggles to will herself towards the elevator. Ghostface follows her, but stops in their tracks after hearing Richie's phone ring. The killer picks up after seeing that it is Sam calling, and proceeds to make Sam choose whether Tara dies or Richie dies. Since Sam cannot come up with a conclusive answer, Ghostface walks up to Tara and is about to maim her right when the elevator door opens, revealing Sam and Dewey. Sam rushes to Tara's aid, while an injured Richie is helped by Dewey. Ghostface suddenly jumps Dewey and the two brawl on the floor. Dewey manages to gain the upper hand, and shoots Ghostface on the torso a few times. The 4 of them then enter the elevator, right when Dewey is reminded that he have to shoot Ghostface in the head, or they always come back. Dewey walks up to Ghostface, who is unconscious on the floor, and is about to shoot right when a phone call from Gale distracts him. Unfortunately, Dewey dies a gruesome death. Gale is shaken by her ex-husband's demise in the hands of the psychopath. At this point, Sidney shows up, revealing that she came to Woodsboro as soon as she heard about what happened. Later in the day, Sam decides to check Tara out of the hospital and plans to skip town with Tara and Richie. Gale and Sidney see Sam as she is about to exit the hospital, and asks for her help to put a stop to the killer and the killing spree. However, Sam is unwilling to stay in town, and is determined to take Tara as far as possible from Woodsboro. Sidney lets them go, but later reveals to Gale that she has planted a tracker on Sam's car. On the way, the asthmatic Tara can't seem to find her inhaler in her bag. Therefore, she asks Richie to stop by Amber's house on their way, where she keeps her spare inhaler. Richie refuses at first, but relents after further pleas. At the same time, Amber is hosting a party at her house, attended by her friends. The party is supposed to be a memorial for Wes, but it is more festive than anything. Chad and Liv are seen making out on the couch, and Liv asks to go upstairs, but Chad refuses, saying that he is still not sure that Liv is not the killer. Liv is offended and moves away from Chad. Later, Chad tries to find Liv around the house and finds his sister, Mindy, having a watch party with the partygoers. They are watching Stab, which Mindy as a horror nerd claims to calm her. Chad asks her if she knows where Liv is, but Mindy has no idea. Chad then steps out of the house and texts Liv, which she replies with a link to an app that would enable them to see each other's location. He treads through the front yard to the location but does not find Liv there.
Yeah.
Ghostface appears behind him and stabs him repeatedly. Not long after, Tara, Sam and Richie arrive at the party and are welcomed warmly by Amber and the partygoers. Amber decides to end the party right then, to make Tara more comfortable. The partygoers are reluctant, prompting Richie to turn on all the lights, and tell them that the place is now a murder target with Tara there. Following that, Amber helps Tara fetch her inhaler in her room. The scene shifts to Sidney and Gale in a speeding car, realizing that Sam is currently in danger. Sidney calls Sam right away and tells her that she is now at Stu Maker's house, where her father and Stu killed everyone, and that someone had planned to bring her there. Meanwhile, Mindy is still watching Stab at home.
I told you, he's around the corner.
Come on, man, turn around.
Behind you.
The ghost face sneaks up behind her and attacks her. Sam hears Mindy scream and rushes to her aid. Ghostface then bolts the scene and Sam checks on the wounded Mindy. Amber, Tara, Richie and a shaken Liv arrive to assess the situation. Liv claims to have found Chad lying bloody outside, and the group does not believe her and they begin to accuse each other of being the killer. Tired of the guessing game, Amber suddenly admits that she is the killer, pulls out a gun and shoots Liv on the spot.
Act 3.
Tara intervenes right when Amber is about to shoot Sam, allowing Sam to run and hide in the basement with Richie. It is at this point that Richie reminds Sam that there are always two killers. He says that Tara might be the other culprit, because it is her that asks them to visit this house. Sam then leaves him alone in the basement, and heads out of the room to find Tara. Shortly after, Sidney and Gale finally arrive by the front yard and sees Amber step out of the house, pretending to be in pain. Sidney doesn't buy the act, but fails to act quickly enough as Amber immediately pulls out a gun, and shoots Gale on the waist before running back inside. The injured Gale asks Sidney to go on with their plan to take down Ghostface. Sidney then enters the house and begins to look for whoever's alive. Meanwhile, Sam is upstairs in the bedroom and opens the door to the closet, finding Tara tied up there. She is about to cut her loose right when she pauses and stares at Tara. We switch back to Sidney, who is now receiving a phone call from Ghostface who tells her that there is a second killer. Sidney proceeds to shoot at another door, this time hearing a shriek from the other side. She opens the door and sees Richie, hiding in a room from the killer. Then all of a sudden, Ghostface sneaks up behind her and tries to attack her. In pain from the fall and still struggling to get up, Sidney yells at Richie to reach for her gun that is now lying on the floor. However, Sam manages to reach the gun first, prompting Richie to stab her, revealing that he is the second killer. Sam then asks why Richie is involved in all this. Richie reveals that he is a hardcore Stab fan, and he feels that the Stab movies after the first one, especially the most recent sequel, are disappointments and the franchise needs fresh inspiration. Therefore, they decided to embark on a new killing spree, bringing back the original cast to provide new and improved source material for a future requel Stab film. Richie tells Sam and Sidney that they plan to portray Sam as the villain in the story. In other words, Sidney must die and they plan to frame Sam as the murderer, supposedly murdering all of these people to lure Sidney back into town. Sam will finally kill Sidney out of vengeance for killing Billy Loomis, the original murderer. At this point, Sidney tries to fight back, prompting Amber to stab her in the gut. Richie asks Amber to go fetch Tara so they can prepare staging the bodies. As Amber goes looking for Tara, she is then jumped by Tara, who bashes her repeatedly with her crutch. The phone rings in the kitchen and Sam tells Richie that it's for him. Richie looks a little shaken but remains convinced that he has the upper hand. The commotion from the other room catches his attention, so Sam takes the opportunity to strike. Amber, on the other hand, manages to throw Tara across the room and walks back into the kitchen, where she is attacked by Gale and Sidney. Sidney bashes her face with a bottle of hand sanitizer and Gale headbutts her and kicks her, shoving her towards the stove, and accidentally turning it on. Wanting to avenge Dewey's death, Gale shoots Amber, which lights her up on fire.
That torch.
Richie looks for Sam upstairs, following a trail of blood. The two collide and crash down the stairs. Sam sees the imaginary figure of her father again, on the reflection in the mirror nearby, pointing her to a knife tucked in the corner of the room under the drapes. She crawls towards it while the deranged Richie goes on and on about how she is a villain, and has to die in the end to complete the story. Right when Richie turns her body around and is about to shoot her, she stabs him in the face, throwing him off, and moves astride him to repeatedly stab him with a passion, until she finally slits his throat to end his life. Sam gets up and Sidney and Gale walk into the room, staring at Richie who is lying lifeless on the floor. She drops the knife and Sidney warns her that he might come back to life unless she shoots him in the head, so she takes the gun from Gale and lands a few bullets in his skull. But suddenly, fortunately Amber is shot in the head by an unseen figure, which is revealed to be Tara. At the end of the film, the police and medical staff are seen roaming about the house, providing aid to Mindy and Chad who turn out to still be alive. When Tara is taken to the hospital, she asks to be taken to a different hospital from before. Sam walks up to Gale and Sidney to thank Sidney and Gale for helping them even when she told them not to. In terms of the story that will be written, Gale decides that her next book will be about what a hero Dewey was, and that the killers can stay dead without anybody knowing who they were. Sam then goes to the hospital with Tara while news reporters cover the crime scene. Just as Scream's closing credits begin, we are greeted with a touching title card that reads for Wes. The tribute is dedicated to Wes Craven, the legendary horror director who helmed the first 4 films in the Scream franchise. Plus, the newest and 5th entry in the Scream franchise is the first not to be directed by Wes Craven, after the director passed away in 2015 from a brain tumor at the age of 76.